Good afternoon. Okay, so we are heading toward the end of our retreat. One more class tomorrow, of my class. So I hope you all are still energetic, still awake, given that the time is around 2, which is very hard to maintain concentration. And I hope you've had your coffee already before coming to this class. Otherwise, it's gonna be so dense and boring, maybe. All right, so we're gonna continue from this morning's slide, which I skipped over because we were at the end of the time. And then I'd like to begin from this, the fourth defining feature of the Mahavibhasa Abhidharma. So we have this notion of moment and space, shana and akasha, which is referring to the time or moment and space. So what is moment or shana? Actually, the Chinese is kind of the uh, cognate with the Sanskrit term shana, and in Chinese it's called shana or chana, if you can reason it. So the Sanskrit is shana, and the Chinese is shana. See, right? It is the shortest unit of time, and each dharma arises and ceases instantly. So in the Northern Abhidharma, they believe that the smallest unit or the shortest, not smallest, it's space, the shortest unit of time exists in the form of shana. So it's like it's not second. So in our Western modern understanding of time, second is the smallest unit of time, right? Nanosecond. Depending on what attribute you want to add to the second, it can be nano and it can even be micro nano and micro nano second, but still it's under the second scope. But within the Buddhist Abhidharma, it's called shana. So what consists of one shana? It's hard. It's debatable within the Abhidharma system as well. It's kind of like more smaller than second, like 1 over a couple 100,000 seconds or so. And time is not treated as a separate real entity or draya, but rather as a conceptual designation dependent on the activity of conditioned phenomena. So when we study Abhidharma from the Northern tradition, although they say they believe in a shortest unit of time, it is not to be taken literally as a real entity. They still do not believe that time has a separate real entity, but rather it's a conceptual designation, just like a conventional truth, dependent on the activity. So still there is a causes and conditions in the time, right? So is time real according to Abhidharma? It's not real. But does it exist? Yes, it exists. Because as long as there is a movement, for example, there must be time and space, right? If we think of a diagram fan, or what diagram is it? So the x coordinate is the time, and the y coordinate is the place, right? And the movement is kind of the diagonal. So starting from here to here, any kind of movement, it must involve time and space. So time and space itself are not real, but they have to exist to accommodate the activity or conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena are characterized by arising and ceasing. So here's the definition of past, present, and future, which is the hallmark of Sarvastivada, right? So this is kind of the branding of Sarvastivada that you've got to know whenever you encounter this Buddhist Abhidharma tradition called Sarvastivada, their trademark, their brand, their hallmark is everything exists, especially in terms of past, present, and future. The moment of arising and ceasing is the present, which is at the very moment, right? Everything is arising and ceasing. It can be proven even within the scientific model of view that our body cells are keep arising and ceasing, dying and regenerating again and again. That which has not yet arisen is designated as the future, and that which has already ceased is called the past. So, apart from the arising and ceasing of conditioned dharmas, there is no such thing as time in and of itself. Now, the space element, the space is the gap between material substances. So we have this notion of void. It is unconditioned dharma, an absence of obstruction, not subject to arising and ceasing. This is kind of a rare sin notion. And void or akasha, notice this void is not emptiness. Emptiness is shunyata in Sanskrit, but the term here is akasha. It's like it's like the void in our physical world. Where is the void? The outside of the planet. And it is not a matter. It's conceived as absolute non-obstructive space. Yet it serves as the support or basis for the existence and activity of material form. So in order to place any kind of thing, we need void. We need space. So void and space is basically the same thing, right? In order for this table to be placed in this room, it's because we have space. If your house doesn't have any more space, you wouldn't accept any more things in your house because you'll say, I don't have any more space in my room. So that idea of space is to establish all the materiality in the world. We need space, right? So if there is no more space between two things, then the third materials cannot be established there. So here's the development of from void to space element to four great elements as atom to constructed form to mind and mental factors and to chain of causality. So usually when we speak of cause and effect, right, our starting point is just begin with the last conclusion of this series of development, which is the chain of causality. But if you want to trace back kind of the origin of the chain of causality, it can be traced back to the voice, to the void. Okay, the fifth point is causality across three times. The doctrine that this you've seen this before, but I'll just want to kind of repeat it a little bit. The main argument for Sarvastivada Abhidharma is that what exists cannot become non-existent, and what is non-existent cannot become existent. So it has the fixed point of view in terms of time and space, but actually it's not. So external existence of Dharma substance. There are two standpoints. This is the first one. All dharmas exist across the three times. And what makes it exist is the function. Existence and non-existence only arises when conditions are met. So it's kind of hard to understand this notion for the very first time. I understand that, but I try to make it clear. So when we say that the future dharma exists, the present dharma exists, and the past dharma exists, does it make sense to you at all? So, for example, if the future Dharma exists, let's say that one day you'll get a new car. Does that, in that case, is the car really exist now? It doesn't exist now. The car is in the future. So when the car is still in the future, does it really exist or no? No, right? So what it's saying here is that the substance, of course, we cannot just use the example of car in the future because we are talking in terms of dharma, the smallest substance. This dharma, this inherent nature must exist across three times. But although we are saying that they exist, they're not always appearing or existing. They only shows up or come up when the function is there, when conditions are met. I guess we have no blackboard, so I can't draw it to you. So if you think of a linear line, this is where the inherent nature of Dharma exists within three times, past, present, and future. But they won't show up before any conditions are met. So in comparison to the Mahayana system of thought, which believes that there's nothing inherently exists or there's nothing inherently real, there are only emptiness, it because there's no such a line. Okay, there's no such a line. But when the causes and conditions are met, they rise. When the causes and conditions are gone, they cease to rise. And where do they go? You don't have to trace it. Where do they go? It's just because of the cause and conditions are not there, they just disappear. One very concrete, vivid example is fire. Have you ever played with a matches, the fire? Right? When there is contact or friction, the fire appears. But before the contact, before the friction, where is the fire? Where is the fire hiding? Can you say there is no fire in the matches? You can't because the fire appears. Can you say that the fire exists in the matches? You can't either, right? And the same applies to when the fire, when you extinguish the fire, where does the fire go? Into nothingness. So where does the fire come from and where does it go to in terms of fire, right? So can we say this laptop has a fire in it? Can we say that? If you say yes, where's the fire? When you try to dissect and open all these components up, you can't find any fire in it.
We call that potential energy and kinetic energy. And when that potential energy is being locked in the match itself, it is only at that point of friction that will release
right?
It will reach its
yes, but what's the term again? The potential
energy.
Yeah, right. But the potential energy itself is not fire. Unless they have several conditions that cause the fire to arise. Right? So can we say the fire is in here? No. But can we also say that the fire is not in here?
Can't do that either.
Right.
Because so what she was saying about energy,
Mm,
potential, or what was the other one? Kinetic. Yeah.
yeah. Right. But potential and kinetic energy themselves aren't fire.
There has to be something to cause it.
Right.
The cause and effect stuff.
Yes, yes. So the point I want to make is that the same phenomena is explained differently between Mahayana and Abhidharma scholars. So Abhidharma scholars see this kind of phenomena, what's the term again? Potential energy and kinetic energy as the Dharma substance. It's always there and has always been there and will always be there. that kind of potential is always there. But when the conditions are met, the fire rises, that's when the function appears. But the Mahayana practitioner wouldn't say that this kind of kinetic energy, potential energy has always been there. So another way, different way in looking at the same phenomena. Anyone's wrong, anyone's right here? Perhaps to some extent, there might be one side is right and one side is not completely right because of the advancement in the theory and arguments within the Mahayana emptiness. That's why it can explain everything profoundly and more perfectly compared. Uh, um, actually, not really. Yeah, Mahayana is not about black, white, and gray. It's emptiness. So you can't really say anything unless there are causes and conditions. Okay, moving on. And two complementary aspects to consider is that the first one, not arising by itself, but dependent on others, this dharma, substance, and function. An intrinsic activity distinctive to each dharma. So, what does it mean by the second point? Each conditioned dharma possesses its own inherent and unchanging nature. This is the very argument that Sarvastivada in Abhidharma holds on to. Very different from Mahayana perspective that says there's nothing inherent and there's nothing unchanging nature. But here we have this kind of notion. There must be something inherent and unchanging nature. What are those? Uh, those mental factors in the handout within the fivefold taxonomy. And each dharma is distinct and its activity is proper to itself. For example, when we take a look at our handout, faith has its own distinct and activity and criteria and definition that we define it as faith, right? But then if we look at the second point, shame also has its own distinct characteristic, nature, and so on and so forth. So we can't mix faith and shame all together. They all has their own distinct nature and inherent characteristic. So for example, the eye sees visible forms. Though this seeing requires supporting conditions, the capacity to see is still intrinsic to the eye sense itself. Thus, causes and conditions merely assist the manifestation of an already existent function. The actual activity belongs to the self nature of the Dharma. So, like eye, right? Remember, the eye function is to see. So, the function of seeing is already inherent in the eye. The lightning, the object, and the consciousness are all the condition factors that make the seeing function arises. All right. Thus, neither the intrinsic nature of a dharma nor its activity arises newly from causes. There's nothing new. So they believe that the ability to see, to hear, to smell, to taste, to touch, and even to think is already inherent within our senses. There's nothing new to be produced. The substance is not produced by causality, and the function is simply the revelation of what is already inherent. And here's the quote: all dharmas function through conditions, but the function belongs inherently to each dharma's own nature. So, to wrap everything up, two things to remember when we are talking about Sarvastivada Abhidharma. The first one is the Dharma substance is inherently there. And then the second, the function only operates when there are causes and conditions there. But it's not because of the causes and conditions this function arises. The function is already there. It's just waited to be enacted. Six characteristic, specific and general characteristic. So we have this kind of notion called specific characteristic, swabhava, or inherent nature in Mahayana term. It is the distinctive quality of a dharma that is not confined to a single object, but can be shared by all members of the same class. So the triadic set, aggregate, senses, elements are the example. And then the second one is the general characteristic or link to the Four Noble Truths and their 16 aspects. So when we think of the practical usage, the specific characteristic used to penetrate the inherent essence of dharmas. And the general characteristic is the framework of contemplation to realize liberation. Liberation. So in each dharma, they have their own specific defining characteristic, feature, inherent nature, but they also possess the shared general characteristic uh, that were linked to the Four Noble Truths and 16 aspects. So usually in the sutra, we only learn about Four Noble Truths. But within the Abhidharma system, we further learn about the 16 aspects within the Four Noble Truths. So for example, when we contemplate about suffering, we not only contemplate on the suffering itself, but it consists of four aspects: impermanence, suffering, emptiness, and non-self. Within the origin, there are cause, arising, condition, and production. Cessation, we have cessation, exhaustion, excellence, and liberation. And then the path, we have the path, thusness, practice, and emergence. Okay, so this is kind of the framework that the practitioners from this lineage, from this school, do in order to achieve liberation. It's uh it's different school from school, system to systems. Okay, now we are departing from the analysis of dharmas into a polemical or dialectical treatise. So already you've known that Sarvastivadin Abhidharma believe in what? Everything exists. But then from the Gandhari manuscript, we find the challenging notion. We find another point of view that challenges this notion. So the debate goes on like this. This is from the opponent. By opponent, I mean the one who opposed the notion of everything exists. They're saying, you say, referring to the Sarvastivadin, you say everything exists. Everything exists at all times. Everything exists everywhere. Everything exists in every aspect. Everything exists by every reason. Everything exists with all modes of being. Everything exists by all causes. Everything exists by all condition. Everything exists. And then this opponent tries to define what do they mean by everything exists. What exists in everything, what exists is everything, yet what exists is not everything. Dharmas that are included in the 12 sense spheres exist. Existence may be said to be dharmas of the three times, which are not mixed together, or else existence is the three times themselves. What exists should not be called existence. What does not exist should be called non-existence. The existence should be called existence. The non-existence should be called non-existence. So now, this opponent is trying to challenge the notion that everything exists, in which actually there is something that is not exist, which is called non-existence. So not everything exists. Further on, it is not the case that everything exists, nor is it the case that everything does not exist. Philosophical? Yes. Welcome to Buddhist scholastic tradition. A past factor exists without efficacy. For example, an arhat may have had desire, anger, and delusion in the past. So this is past dharmas before they reach arahantship. But the past should be referred to as nothing but the past. So they are trying to say, they are trying to claim that the past is actually non-existent anymore. The future should be referred to as nothing but the future because they have not a reason, they have yet to come, they can't be said to be an existence, but they are rather a non-existent. The present should be referred to as nothing but the present. Moving on, this is kind of the critique. The great Sarvastivadin maintains that everything exists, right? But then the challenge is that if you say everything exists, then you have to say that the soul exists. But in fact, in Buddhism, we don't have soul, right? And they also believe, the great Sarvastivadin also believes that soul does not exist. So there is something that is non-existent. Not everything exists. If you say everything exists, then the personhood exists, which is not the case in Buddhism. That the individual exists, that the six aggregate exists. How many aggregates that we know of in Buddhism? Only five aggregates. And they also believe that there are only five aggregates. So if you say everything exists, then you have to accept that the six aggregates also exist, but they don't. So you're contradicting yourself. If you say everything exists, then the 13 sense sphere exists. How many sense sphere that we know of? 12. Eye, ear, nose, six senses plus six objects. If you say everything exists, that a 19th element exists. How many elements that we know of in Buddhist system? 18 elements. And then the funny part is if you say everything exists, then a fifth noble truth exists. How many noble truths in Buddhism that we know of? Four. And they also believe that there is only four, no fifth. So if you say everything exists, then the fifth noble truth should exist too, which is not the case. So you see the challenge, the debate is really, really, really interesting between the Abhidharma schools by schools because there are some schools that believe only present exists. Past and future are just illusion. The past had gone and the future is yet to come. But our proponent here, the great Sarvastivadin, believes in three times past, present, and future exist. So now my question to you is that which position would you stand to? Are you on the side of three times everything exists, or are you siding with this opponent that say not everything exists? Who are in the side with the Sarvastivadin? Some. You believe everything exists? Some. You need more information to answer. Yeah. Who is on the side of only the present exists?
Explain us the soul that is being moved through its different stages because of karma, and what was that soul? Because when it goes to hell or goes to
Okay, so in Buddhism, we don't have a notion of soul. Yes, no soul, only five aggregates. Yeah. Okay, I leave a discussion to you all later to be discussed, and we have to move on. Of course, we have one session at night that we can explore if you want to. Yeah, and then we'll come into the Buddhist scholastic tradition. Okay, when you say everything exists at all times, then the afternoon would exist in the morning, and the morning would exist in the afternoon. The past and the future would exist in the present, and so on with regard to other times. So, which is more convincing to you, the opponent or the proponent? I leave it up to y'all. And then we are moving to, according to schedule, today is supposed to be Shariputra Abhidharma, but this is just gonna be brief. So what I'm doing here within 45 minutes is that I'm moving from one school of Abhidharma to another school of Abhidharma to another school of Abhidharma so that I don't want to confuse you. What am I really talking at the moment? So, right now, we are in the very, very early stage of Abhidharma before all of the previous notions that we've just seen. Before the Great Sarvastivadin arose, before the Vibhajyadin, which believe only present exists, arose, we are at this early stage right now. Okay, here is the taxonomy of Dharma. Previously, how many fold of taxonomy that we've learned so far? Five, according to Northern tradition, right? And four, according to the Southern tradition, right? But then at this early period, how many taxonomy we have? Only three. So you see the expansion as the time moved. The three taxonomy that we have in this early Abhidharma are the first one, feeling, perception, volition as one category. And then the second one is form in the field of Dharma. And the third one is the unconditioned. What is missing here from the fourfold or fivefold taxonomy? We are missing, actually not no missing, because the mental factors is implied into the first one, feeling, perception, and volition, and even the dissociated with mind also uh, implied in the first one. Okay, let's dig into the Sariputra Abhidharma mental factor. This is early model of classification and lacks of a rigorously defined taxonomy. So we might find some error and some places that don't make sense because it's not mature enough in terms of their categorization. So for example, mindfulness, wisdom, and mental energy, according to this Abhidharma, can be wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral. As a comparison, if you take a look at your handout, where is mindfulness, wisdom, and mental energy in all the three systems here? So let's begin with mindfulness. Where is mindfulness in the Abhidharmata Sangaha? Wholesome. Wholesome number 6. So it's wholesome. It's not it's not common to the three good, bad, or indeterminate. And then where is it in the Abhidharma Kosa, the mindfulness? It's universal. Number 8. Yeah. And then where is it in Yogacara? It's occasional or specific, number 4. So already this big term in Western mindfulness is actually scattered around the system. It can be wholesome, it can be mindful, it can be universal, it can be specific. So already it's reflecting in the early period here. Mindfulness can be wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral, but it cannot be unwholesome in our three system in the handout. Moving on to the wisdom. Where is wisdom in Abhidhamata Sangaha? Well, it's tricky because there's no such thing as wisdom in our table. But if you turn into the second page, you'll see on that non-delusion, there's wisdom faculty. So it's under wholesome only rather than wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral. And then where is wisdom in Kosha? In Abhidharma Kosha, wisdom is actually universal number 7, intellect. Although the connotation might be different, it's not like the wisdom about Four Noble Truth. It's just a regular kind of mental intellectual activity. And then where is it in the Yogacara? It's in the occasional, right? So it cannot be unwholesome or neutral in our three systems here in the handout. And then energy, where is energy in the Southern tradition in our handout? It's in occasional. In kosha, it's in wholesome. And then in Yogacara, it's also under wholesome, under the same category. Okay. And then if we look at the faith, in this early Abhidharma, faith can be wholesome only as devotional trust. So we haven't talked really about each of these mental factor in this retreat because we don't have time to analyze each of these 52, 46, and 51 dharma. It'll take about a week or two to do that if we go one by one. So faith in this early Abhidharma has many different contents, but the devotional trust one, especially toward the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, is considered wholesome only. But it can be trifunctional. It can be wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral, depending on the various moral context. So, for example, if you believe in false view, it it's no longer wholesome. It becomes unwholesome. If you believe in some radical ideology that will harm other beings, then it's not a good faith. So, in some sense, the early Abhidharma kind of makes sense rather than if we take a look at our faith, it's all in the wholesome section, right? So if you look at the table, it's very stable within the wholesome universals, the first five. Faith, shame, fear of wrong, non-greed, and non-hatred are all within the same position under the wholesome universal. Because why? Because the faith under these three systems is defined as faith toward the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha only. But here, the faith is kind of more broad speaking term. And then concentration is regarded as exclusively wholesome, right? If you take a look at our concentration in our three systems, where are they in the chart? So you don't find the word concentration in the Southern tradition because it's categorized under general universal number seven, one pointedness. We've just learned about concentration this morning, right? When the mind is pointed, it's fixed into one object, it's called concentration or jhana. And then where is it in the kosha, in the second column? It's under general universal as well, right? And then where is it in the Yogacara? It's under occasional or yeah, occasional or specific. So what does it mean by universal and occasional? Universal means that these mental factors always arise within our mind at any moment, even right now, tomorrow, yesterday. It's always there. Contact, feeling, perception, volition, attention, life faculty, one pointedness. They all have to be present at all times in order for us to function normally, right? If you want to hear a voice, you need a contact. And after hearing a voice and looking at a thing, there is contact, there is feeling, whether you like it or you dislike it or just neutral. There is perception, whether you understand it or not. There is this volition, there is this attention, right? These five are fixed within all systems. But starting from number six, seven, it's all scattered around the chart because some might consider it's not universal. Life faculty is not universal, right? So if you look at indeterminate part, we don't have any indeterminate in the Southern tradition, but we begin to see indeterminate mental factor in the Abhidharma Kosha, right? Let me show you so that everyone here can see. Where is it? Okay, so here, if you look at the indeterminate, we have lust, we have hatred, we have conceit, and we have doubt. Isn't that kind of confusing? Why is lust, hatred, conceit, doubt considered indeterminate and not unwholesome? Because clearly they are not a good mental factors. So here already we can see the Abhidharma masters at that time from this northern tradition might consider that having a lust is it really depending on the context. If you are having a desire to study Dharma, it's a good thing. If you have a desire to do something bad, maybe it is a bad thing, right? But lust by itself actually should belong to unwholesome. Yeah. So yeah, this list might not be perfect because we have this kind of fluctuate placement among the scholars. Okay. About the wholesome, there are only eight wholesome in the early Abhidharma, which are non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, devotional trust. This is actually faith, but in form of devotional trust, mental tranquility, exertion, concentration, and equanimity. And if you compare to our chart in your handout, actually they are pretty stable. In other words, these eight on the slide here can also be found in your handout under the wholesome universals, right? So if you see non-greed is there in the handout, non-hatred is there, non-delusion is not there, it's somewhere else. That's why it's in blue. And then devotional trust or faith is there. Mental tranquility is there across three systems. Exertion is there, at least according to the northern tradition. Concentration is scattered around, and equanimity is there. Does it make sense? Great. Okay. Now, about the unwholesome mental factors. There are fetters and defilements. Initially in the sutra, these fetters and defilements are all unwholesome mental factors. There's nothing to worry about. But the placement is tricky here in the early Abhidharma. They considered fetters as dissociated with mind. In other words, it's not coming from the mind, but it's not from the form. It's not from the mind either. So it's something in between. Whereas defilements are associated with the mind. So what are fetters? There are 10 fetters, and defilements, there are also 10 defilements. So the doctrine of the 10 fetters combined with the schema of defilements forming a system in which latent or defilements and manifest afflictions or fetters are analyzed distinctly but interconnected. So the idea of fetters, first, what is defilement? If we take a look at this picture, what is defilement? It's like a muddy water. The water is being defiled. So this is kind of the analogy. So our mind is like the water. When we have this kind of defilements, namely desire, ill will, false view, attachment to rituals, doubt, restlessness, conceit, ignorance, envy, avarice, our mind is polluted by this kind of trash. So this is kind of the simile. Do you want your mind to be polluted like this or no? If not, then we have to get rid of these defilements. So this is the idea of defilements. It's defile, right? It's pollute everything. But then what is fetters? When I speak of fetter, what comes to mind? What kind of imagery pop up in your mind. So feather is kind of like a chain that binds us in the cycle of life and rebirth. That's why we cannot liberate because of the feathers. So, as a matter of fact, the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, and arahant, they achieve such sagehood state because they have abandoned one or more of the feathers. So when the stream enterer abandon false view, doubt, and attachment to rituals, the first three, they attain the first sagehood, the first stream enterer, right? When they weaken the number four and five, they attain the once returner. And then when they completely eradicate the sensual lust and ill will, they attain the non-returner state. When they eradicate all the 10 feathers, they achieve arahantship. In other words, they are liberated. So already we can see the idea of liberation is tied to this analogy that we are being chained, we are being tied up by the feathers, right? And the idea of defilements is related to the idea of contamination, pollution of our mind. Both can make us stuck in the samsara, and both can make us liberated in the from the samsara as well. Okay, because I have to stop here because the next slide for tomorrow is gonna be interesting. So, spoil alert, we're gonna be learning about the parable masters. So these masters also came from the same tradition, the same Abhidharma tradition, but within a very different approach in teaching the Dharma, right? For these past few days, we've been talking about mental factors, we've been talking about debate, logic, highly intellectual jargons, technical terms, and stuff like that. This is one sided of a coin within the Abhidharma master. But then we have another master, which is the parable master. They disagree with this kind of logic, complicated matter to be expounded to the lay devotee. It's not gonna work. So what we are gonna do is we are going to use stories, similes, analogy, easy word, everyday examples to illustrate the Dharma, to teach the Dharma to the audience. Interesting, right? From the same tradition, but different approaches. All right, so that's for tomorrow. We save the dessert for the last. Any more question? Yes.
Please, a question about the origins of the fetters and the defilements. So are they all arising because of the three poisons, hatred, ignorance, and greed? Or is it something finer like that broken down? So for example, the three kinds of cravings, but I'm just wondering about, the root cause.
Yeah, you're right. So the root cause is always the three poisons. Because if you want to trace back which one is the original and which one is the development, normally, the development of Buddhism is kind of expanded rather than getting summarized. So we have initially only three poisons, and this is what the Buddha says throughout the sutra literature, the sutra canon, always emphasizing on get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion, the three poisons. Very basic and simple because it's already encapsulated all the defilements. But then Abhidharma, as you know, by its nature, they try to make thing complicated and complex because they want to be detailed as possible. They want to break, divide everything down to its smallest parts as much as you can think of. So, for example, the 10 defilements, right? We can always summarize it into 3 poisons, right? False view, doubt, attachment to ritual. What are those? Delusion. Lust, greed. Ill will, hatred. Lust from existence, greed. Lust for a formless material, greed. What is conceit then? Is conceit under the greed or hatred? Which one? Which one do you think?
Yeah, it could skip away.
Could go either way. Yeah, actually we have our answer in the table. If you turn into the unwholesome,
C could be attachment.
yes. Yeah. So conceit is actually a kind of greed. Uh okay, ignorance is delusion. What about envy? Would you categorize it as a greed or hatred? Greed, yeah. Avarice, hatred, or greed, right? Yeah. Any other question? No more? Okay, we can stop here.